looking to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles coming to you live from Manila, and from Cambodia, here is Crystal. Hello, Crystal.
Hi, Alma, and to everyone who's watching, happy Monday. I am Crystal Ann Ballesteros from your EBC Cambodia Bureau, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines. The Philippines Defense Minister on Sunday accused Beijing of planning to occupy more features in the disputed South China Sea in an escalating war of words over Chinese vessels in the water.
Dozens are dead and still missing after deadly floods in Indonesia.
And the man behind Vietnam's successful handling of the coronavirus pandemic, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, was formally sworn in as president in Hanoi on Monday.
An American exploration team said a U.S. Navy destroyer sunk during World War II and lying nearly 6,500 meters below sea level of the Philippines has been reached in the world's deepest shipwreck dive.
The Philippines Defense Minister on Sunday accused Beijing of planning to occupy more features in the disputed South China Sea in an escalating war of words over Chinese vessels in the waters. A fleet of more than 200 Chinese ships that sparked a diplomatic row last month after parking at Whitsun Reef off the Philippines is now scattered across the contested Spratly Islands. Manila has called on Beijing to withdraw the maritime militia vessels from the area, saying their presence is unlawful. China has refused, insisting they are fishing boats and are allowed to operate there. But Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana said the vessels were there for other reasons. He said the continued presence of Chinese maritime militias in the area reveals their intent to further occupy features in the West Philippine Sea. Lorenzana appointed to China's seizure of the Philippine claimed Scarborough Shoal and Mischief Reef as previous examples of them brazenly violating his country's sovereignty. On Saturday, the outspoken Lorenzana rejected China's claims that the boats parked at Whitsun Reef and where dozens remained last week had been seeking shelter from bad weather. He said, quote, "I am no fool. The weather has been good so far, so they have no other reason to stay there. Get out of there," unquote. The Chinese embassy in Manila called Lorenzana's statement perplexing and urged authorities to avoid unprofessional remarks which may further fan irrational emotions. Beijing often invokes the so-called Nine-Dash Line to justify its apparent historic rights over most of the South China Sea. And it has ignored a 2016 International Tribunal decision that declared this assertion as without basis. Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei all have rival claims to the waters, which incorporate strategically crucial shipping lanes and could harbor oil and gas deposits.
Two Australians who were detained in Myanmar late last month have been released and have left Yangon, Canberra's Foreign Affairs Department said Monday. Business consultants Matthew O'Kane and Krista Avery, a dual Canadian-Australian citizen, were put under house arrest after trying to leave the country on a relief flight in March. A Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade spokesperson said Australian officials had provided consular assistance to the couple during their detention and release. The couple ran a bespoke consultancy business in Yangon. A third Australian economist, Sean Turnell, an advisor to civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who was arrested a week after the putsch, remain in custody. The economist and university professor was the first foreign national arrested following the February 1 coup that ousted the Nobel laureate from power and plunged Myanmar into turmoil. He is being investigated by the junta over alleged immigration and state secrets offenses. Canberra has suspended military cooperation with Naypyidaw and has advised its citizens to leave the country if it is safe to do so.
Meanwhile, French energy giant Total will not halt gas production in coup-hit Myanmar, according to its chief on Sunday, despite growing calls for foreign companies to sever ties with the junta as it escalates a brutal crackdown on dissent. Chief Executive Patrick Puyan said Total had a duty to stay the course because gas it produces supplies electricity to millions in Yangon as well as Western Thailand. Can a company like Total decide to cut off the electricity supply to millions of people and in so doing disrupt the operations of hospitals, businesses? He said in an interview with the journal Du Dimanche. Now, Puyan said he was outraged by the repression in Myanmar, but would refuse to act to the detriment of our local employees and the Burmese population, who are already suffering so much. Demonstrations against the coup, supported by a widespread strike by civil servants, have crippled Myanmar's economy, leaving gas exports as one of junta's main sources of revenues. The military-controlled Myanmar oil and gas enterprise has partnerships with Total and U.S. rival Chevron and generates annual revenues of around $1 billion from the sale of natural gas. Total paid around $230 million to the Myanmar authorities in 2019 and $176 million in 2020 in the form of taxes and production rights, according to the company's own financial statements.
About 300 protesters rally in a park of Chiang Mai, Thailand, against the coup in Myanmar.
Dozens are dead, still missing after the deadly floods in Indonesia. Floods sparked by torrential rain wreaked havoc and destruction on islands stretching from Flores Island in Indonesia to Timor-Leste, a small nation east of the Indonesian archipelago. The deluge and subsequent landslides caused dams to overflow, submerging thousands of houses and leaving rescue workers struggling to reach survivors trapped in the aftermath. Mud inundated homes, bridges and roads in the East Flores municipality, where rescuers struggled to reach a remote and badly hit area because of rains and strong waves. Authorities said in neighboring Timor-Leste, 11 were killed by floods in the capital Dili. The death toll and the number of injured victims could still rise. In Lembata, an island halfway between Flores and Timor, parts of affected villages were displaced down a mountain slope and near the coastline, according to an AFP journalist on the scene. Road access has been cut off and local officials were forced to deploy heavy equipment to reopen the roads. Injured victims have been evacuated to neighboring villages that were unaffected by the flash floods, as well as local hospitals and health facilities. The country's disaster agency has estimated that 125 million Indonesians, nearly half of the country's population, live in areas at risk of landslides. The disasters are often caused by deforestation, according to environmentalists.
Non-Muslims in Indonesia celebrated Good Friday under heavy security with forces on high alert following a suicide bomb attack at a cathedral last week. Heavily armed and military personnel were seen at churches during Easter celebrations across the vast Muslim majority nation, where Christians form 10% of the population. Indonesia has long struggled with attacks by Islamist militants and has been on edge since two suicide bombers blew themselves up at a church in Makassar City on Sulawesi Island, wounding 20 people. Authorities alleged the Makassar bombers were members of the pro-Islamic State extremist group. National Police spokesman Rusdi Hartono said Thursday that police across the country had been ordered to anticipate potential terror attacks against churches during the Catholic Easter celebrations. There were another attack on Wednesday when a 25-year-old woman wearing a face veil entered a police complex in downtown Jakarta and opened fire on officers before she was shot dead. Police describe her as a lone wolf Islamic State sympathizer.
In other news, a total of 231 more police officers recovered from the coronavirus disease here in the Philippines. In an update on Monday, Philippine National Police Deputy Chief for Administration, Lieutenant General Guillermo Eleazar said this brought the police force's total recovery tally to 13,391. Meanwhile, 173 new infections were reported, bringing the total active case count to 2,632. The PNP has so far recorded a total of 16,063 COVID-19 cases with 40 deaths. Of the 173 infections on Sunday, 168 were tagged as new infections, while 5 were classified as reinfections. Eleazar said 68 of the PNP's active cases are being treated in hospitals, while 2,564 are being cared for in isolation centers.
May pera sa basura, lalo na kung magagawa ang iba't ibang bagay mula sa mga recyclable material na inaakala ng iba na itatapon na. May ilang barangay sa bansa ang nagre-recycle ng basura at makikita ang iba't ibang bagay na gawa sa basura. Mga dekorasyon sa bahay, sa mga proyektong ito, nagiging malinis ang kapaligiran bukod sa mayroon pang pagkakakitaan.
Philippines, amid the surge in COVID-19 cases in the National Capital Region or NCR and surrounding provinces, the government decided to extend by another week the enhanced community quarantine classification or ECQ in the so-called NCR Plus bubble. In an announcement on state PTV on Saturday, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, or IATF, recommended in its latest meeting to prolong the lockdown, heeding the recommendation of health experts in and out of the government. Let's listen in.
Kakatapos lang po ng diskusyon para sa ating mga quarantine classification. Nagrekomenda po inyong IATF na pahabain pa ang enhanced community quarantine ng minimum na 1 linggo sa buong Metro Manila at mga probinsya ng Laguna, Bulacan, Cavite at Rizal. Uulitin ko po, karagdagang linggo, minimum 1 additional week beginning on the 5th sa Metro Manila, Laguna, Cavite at Rizal. Kasama po dito sa ng ating IATF na kinakailangan paintingin po yung ating tinatawag na PDITR o yung ating prevention, detection, isolation, tracing at reintegration. At dahil dito po, rini-require po natin ngayon na magkaroon ng daily monitoring ang mga lokal na pamahalaan, ang ating mga NTF SARS para po malaman natin kung ano yung resulta ng pinainting natin na PDITR. Kasama po dyan sa PDITR na tinatawag natin ay yung pagbabahay-bahay, paghahanap ng mga merong simptomas at pagsasubject sa kanila sa PCR testing at sa isolation. Pagdating naman po doon sa ating health capacity na kinakailangan natin talagang pataasin, mabuting balita po. Dito po sa linggo ng karagdagang ECQ ay meron po tayong 110 additional na moderate to severe beds na bubuksan na po at magiging operationalized o magiging operational dito po sa Quezon Institute. No? Bukod pa po ito sa mabubuksan natin mga additional moderate and severe bed capacity sa susunod na buwan, hindi po bababayan sa 160 additional moderate to severe bed capacity. So yun lang po, itong 1 week pong ito, patapos po ng 1 week, kung napatunayan po natin na gumagana ang ating PDITR, pwede naman po tayong mag-MECQ sa susunod na linggo. Pero titignan po muna natin ang resulta ng karagdagang ECQ. So ulitin ko po, 1 more week at least ng ECQ sa Metro Manila, Laguna, Bulacan, Cavite at Rizal. Sasabayan po natin na pinainting na prevention, detection, isolation, tracing, and rehabilitation na imo-monitor natin on a daily basis. Nananawagan din po tayo sa mga lokal na pamahalaan sa mga lugar neto na paintingin ang kanilang enforcement doon sa ating mga ginagawang quarantine measures, kasama na po yung paninita sa mga tao na hindi sumusunod sa minimum health standard ng mask, hugas, iwas. Nananawagan din po kami doon sa mga pwede na po magpabakuna, magpabakunan po kayo.
The extended ECQ will be from April 5 until April 11, 2021. And cover the areas under the so-called NCR Plus, which includes Metro Manila, Laguna, Cavite, Bulacan, and Rizal. During the said period, the government will intensify its prevention, detection, isolation, tracing, and reintegration or PDITR operations to arrest the spread of infection within their jurisdiction. He said local government officials would also be required to conduct house-to-house visits to ensure any infected person within the said household is tested and isolated. To address the diminishing number of facilities for COVID-19 patients in NCR, Roque said a new 110-bed facility in Quezon Institute in Quezon City will soon be operational to accommodate patients with moderate to severe COVID-19 symptoms. As of 4 p.m. on April 3, the DOH also recorded 599 recoveries and 103 deaths. Of the total number of cases, 21.1% or 165,715 are active cases, 77.2% or 604,905 have recovered, and 1.71% or 13,423 have died.
The government has repatriated more than 500,000 overseas Filipino workers who were displaced by the pandemic, the Labor Department said on Sunday. In a report to Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III, Overseas Workers Welfare Administration Head Hans Leo Cacdac said 502,581 OFW repatriates have been safely transported back to their home provinces after undergoing COVID tests and quarantine protocols in various hotels. The latest batch of repatriates consisted of 1,471 OFWs who were sent home on Saturday. A separate report of the Department of Labor and Employment's International Labor Affairs Bureau, or DOLE ILAB, showed there are 645,071 OFWs affected by the pandemic, 627,576 of whom were displaced. ILAB Director Alice Vespera said 49,698 of those displaced OFWs had requested for repatriation, while 75,297 stayed on site. ILAB records only indicated increasing number of OFWs infected with the disease. As of Sunday, it recorded 17,495 confirmed COVID cases among OFWs based on reports submitted by 40 Philippine overseas labor offices worldwide. Of the total, 10,155 recovered and 938 died.
In Vietnam, the man behind Vietnam's successful handling of the coronavirus pandemic, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, was formally sworn in as a president in Hanoi on Monday. Phuc, 66, was Vietnam's prime minister for the last 5 years, a period in which the economy boomed and his government's COVID-19 response won plaudits at home and abroad. Following secret voting on Monday, Phuc scored the maximum votes among the almost 500-member rubber-stamped National Assembly. Vietnam is run by the Communist Party and officially led by the party General Secretary, President, and Prime Minister, with key decisions made by the 18-member Politburo. Vietnam is in the midst of its twice-a-decade leadership transition, with 76-year-old Nguyen Phu Trong re-elected in January as Party General Secretary, the most important of the three roles. Phuc was the only candidate nominated for president, as Trong, who had held the presidency since 2018 after the sudden death of his predecessor, stepped down. The National Assembly said earlier this was the first time ever a prime minister was nominated to the position of the president. After his swearing in, Phuc told the nation he was lucky and honored to be given the position, which is now only second to Trong in the power escalator.
In other news, New Yorkers marched to protest against anti-Asian violence in Manhattan after a brutal videotape assault of a 65-year-old Filipina-American woman that sparked outrage amid a surge of anti-Asian violence in the United States. New York police last Wednesday charged a suspect in a brutal videotape assault of the 65-year-old Filipina Asian American woman that sparked outrage amid the surge of violence in the United States. Police identified the man as 38-year-old Brandon Elliott, who was released from prison in 2019 on lifetime parole for stabbing his mother to death in front of his 5-year-old sister in 2002. A spokesperson said NYPD officers arrested Elliott late on Tuesday last week at a hotel in Times Square near the scene of the crime that is housing homeless people during the pandemic. He was charged with felony assault as a hate crime in the early hours of Wednesday, according to police in a statement. The attack, which took place on a sidewalk in broad daylight in Midtown Manhattan on Monday, was caught on CCTV footage from inside an adjacent building and showed bystanders seemingly looking on without even intervening. The victim, whose identity has not been released but of Filipino descent, was hospitalized with multiple injuries, including a fractured pelvis. She has since left the hospital, according to local media. Manhattan prosecutor Cyrus Vance said Elliott faces up to 25 years in prison if convicted. The violence and apparent reluctance of witnesses to help the victim also sparked uproar. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said the attack was horrifying and repugnant, and adding that anti-Asian violence was becoming an epidemic across the country that must stop now.
In Brunei, they officially began its national vaccination program for COVID-19 at vaccination centers throughout the country on Saturday. According to Brunei's Ministry of Health, a total of 754 people received their first dose of COVID-19 vaccine injection on Saturday, including Haji Awang Muhammad Isham, Minister of Health, who received his first jab on Sinopharm vaccine at the Raha Esteri Perengan Anak Saleha Hospital, the country's biggest public hospital with dozens of other recipients. The COVID-19 vaccine is free for citizens and people residing in Brunei who are 18 years old and above. In the first phase, vaccine shots will be given to around 2,000 local frontliners, including health facility staff, uniformed personnel from the Royal Brunei Armed Forces, Royal Brunei Police Force, and as well as those involved in quarantines and immigration post-control affairs. Brunei Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah received the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine injection at the Royal Palace, Istana Nurul Iman, on Thursday. After the first dose of injection, the Sultan has consented for the rolling out of the national vaccination program.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Your weekly dose of entrepreneurial inspiration to update you on the latest developments in the world of business. Get up close and personal with CEOs and thought leaders to help you discover valuable insights, sharpen your instincts for smart decision making with the latest markets and economic trends, disruptive ideas, global innovation, social entrepreneurship, and other leading-edge business ideas. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business, from vision to action.
Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak arrived in court to begin an appeal against his conviction on corruption charges and 12-year jail term linked to the multi-billion-dollar 1MDB scandal. And take a look. Najib Razak. Now, he was sentenced to 12 years in jail on corruption charges linked to the multi-billion-dollar 1MDB scandal that led to the downfall of his government 2 years ago. The ex-prime minister was also fined almost $50 million after being convicted on all 7 charges in the first of several trials related to the looting of the One Malaysia Development Berhad Sovereign Wealth Fund. The 67-year-old is challenging the verdict and will be allowed to remain free on continued bail until a lengthy appeals process is complete. Billions of dollars were stolen from Malaysia's main state investment vehicle and spent on everything from high-end real estate to pricey art. Investment bank Goldman Sachs also became embroiled in this scandal and faces a series of hefty fines in both the U.S. and Malaysia. As a result, anger at the looting played a large part in the shock loss of Najib's long-ruling coalition at elections back in 2018. And he was arrested and hit with dozens of charges following his defeat.
Going back to Indonesia, rescuers were searching for 17 missing fishermen after 2 boats collided in waters of Indonesia's West Java province, officials said Sunday. A fishing ship hit a larger cargo vessel on Saturday evening off Indramayu Regency, flipping the wooden boat's 32 crew members into the water, said Bandung Rescue Agency spokeswoman Seni Wolondari. Wolondari told AFP that some 15 survivors have been evacuated to the cargo vessel, but the team is still searching for 17 other crew who went missing. Those rescued sustained minor injuries from the accident and would be taken to a nearby hospital. The Habco Pioneer cargo vessel was sailing through the port of Merak from the Indonesian island of Borneo when it was hit by a local fishing boat in Indramayu waters, said Wolondari. Boat accidents are common in Indonesia, a Southeast Asian archipelago of around 17,000 islands, due to lax safety standards. In January last year, 10 people went missing after a boat carrying 20 migrant workers to neighboring Malaysia capsized off the coast of Sumatra Island.
In Thailand, a Bangkok residence building collapsed on Saturday, killing at least 4 rescue workers and a resident, according to an emergency worker. The 3-story house, located in a luxury gated community in western Bangkok, was engulfed in flames around 6 a.m. and the fire raged for about an hour before it was put out. At around 7 a.m., as firefighters and rescue workers were moving through the raised structure and in the Thai capital, it abruptly collapsed, killing at least 5, including the resident. Now, the cause of the collapse remains unknown. By 4 p.m., Jiratikorn Banjongkit, chief of rescue at the Potek Tung Foundation, said that rescue workers and firefighters were still working to free 4 of the bodies. Only 1 had been retrieved from under the rubble of concrete and wiring structure. Bangkok Governor Aswin Kwanwan told reporters that there was no safe passage to easily retrieve the bodies and see if more had been trapped. Swin added that a forensic team was investigating the cause of the fire. Building collapses are rare in the metropolis of Bangkok, which is replete with gleaming, towering malls and residential sprawl.
In another news, Asean and some of the bloc's closest trading partners have been forecast to enjoy an economic expansion of 6.7% this year and 4.9% in 2022. The ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office, or AMRO, released the forecast on the ASEAN Plus 3 region, which includes the 10 Asian nations or ASEAN nations and China, South Korea, Japan in its annual flagship report, the ASEAN Plus 3 Regional Economic Outlook published on March 31. According to the report, ASEAN Plus 3 economies have proven to be resilient in the face of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, but are not out of the woods yet. It said the region, home to 30% of the world's population, accounts for only 3% of the total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases globally. However, until herd immunity is achieved through widespread vaccinations, localized containment of the virus may continue to be necessary. AMRO Chief Economist Ho Ikor said as governments become more experienced at handling infections, targeted measures that are decisive, effective, and proactive will allow economies to minimize further loss of lives while enabling economic activity to continue. The report said the road to recovery was filled with challenges but also presented opportunities. The pandemic has impacted the region unevenly, and recovery across the sectors and economies remain fragile. Some segments look set to rebound quickly, with the turnaround in manufacturing and exports and the adoption of new technologies, while others will remain under pressure and must adopt.
Impormasyong mahalaga sa taong bayan. Patas na pagbabalita. Papakinggan ang magkabilang panig. Lilinawin ang mga issue at kaagad na ihahatid ng objektibo. Mata ng Agila. Dumadagit ng pinakasariwang pangyayari, hindi lamang sa loob ng bansa, kundi sa iba't ibang panig ng daigdig. Mula sa Eagle News Teams at sa tulong ng makabagong teknolohiya, tiyak na makakalap kaagad ang katotohanan. Para sa mas matalas, malinaw at malalimang pagbabalita. Ito ang mas pinatalas na Mata ng Agila. Inihahatid ng veteranong broadcast journalist na si Eli Saludar. Kasama si Binibining Pilipinas Intercontinental 2019, Emma Tiglao. At pinangungunahan ng batikang mamamahayag ng bansa, Vic De Leon Lima. Mata ng Agila, Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 6 hanggang alas 8 ng gabi, dito sa Net 25.
Sila ang mga kinikilalang bayaning may mahalagang papel para makamit ang kalayaan at pagbabago sa Pilipinas. Pero sa panahong ito, may mga bagong bayaning nakikipaglaban sa sakit na lumaganap sa buong daigdig, ang COVID-19. Ang ating mga frontliner, gaya ng healthcare workers, mga doktor, nurses, medical technologists, at iba pang health professionals, mga pulis, sundalo, security guards, mga tauhan na nangangalaga sa seguridad at mahahalagang pangangailangan ng bawat komunidad. Ang mga bagong bayani, ating pasalamatan. Kilalanin ang kanilang sakripisyo at serbisyo para sa lahat.
Thailand's Patty Tavanakit steered a steady course to hold off charging Lydia Ko and win the ANA Inspiration on Sunday, making her first LPGA title a major championship. Take a look. Patty, 21 years old, started the day with a 5-shot lead and fired a 4-under par 68 at Mission Hills in Rancho Mirage, California. Her 18-under total of 270 put her 2 strokes in front of New Zealand's former world number 1 Ko, who stormed from 8 adrift with a sensational 10-under 62 for 272. 4 players shared third on 277. South Korean Kim Se-young, American Nelly Korda, Denmark's Nana Koertz, Madsen, and China's Feng Shanshan. An American exploration team said a U.S. Navy destroyer sunk during the World War II and lying nearly 6,500 meters below sea level of the Philippines has been reached in the world's deepest shipwreck dive. Take a look. Texas-based undersea technology company Caladan Oceanic said a crude submersible filmed, photographed, and surveyed the wreckage of the USS Johnston off Samar Island during 2 8-hour dives completed late last month. The 115-meter-long ship was sunk on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf as U.S. forces fought to liberate the Philippines, then a U.S. colony, from Japanese occupation. Its location in the Philippine Sea was discovered in 2019 by another expedition group. But an American exploration team says most of the wreckage was beyond the reach of their remotely operated vehicle, Y-6,500 meters. Y-6,500 meters below sea level of the Philippines has been reached in the world's deepest shipwreck dive. Only 141 of the ship's 327 crew survived, according to U.S. Navy records. And it said the Caladan Oceanic-backed expedition found the bow, the bridge, and the midsection intact, with the hull number 557 still visible. 2 full 5-inch gun turrets, twin torpedo racks, and multiple gun mounts remain in place. Team navigator and historian Parks Stevenson said the wreck bore the damage inflicted during the intense surface battle 76 years ago.
Malaysia has its very own Leaning Tower, a tilting brick and wood building with Chinese-style architecture that was built in the 19th century during colonial times. But beyond its tilt, a result of flooding, the 25.5-meter or 83-feet tower in the middle of the town of Teluk Intan has little in common with its much taller Italian namesake in the city of Pisa. Despite that, visitors take inside and snap photos in front of the historical landmark.
Dia sebabkan condong, banjir. Banjir besar, tanah gambut di belah sana, dia cuma mendap. Beza daripada belah kanan dan kiri saya, dengan kanan, cuma dia satu kaki condong dia. Itu dia kelebihannya, istimewa dia. Dulu orang panggil jam tinggi. Sekarang orang panggil menara condong. Sebab dia bangunan dah condong. Itu dia.
And that's it for our broadcast. Thank you, Crystal, for keeping me company today.
Thank you as well, Alma. And before we go, I just want to greet our EBC correspondent here in Cambodia, Ludivina Otadoy. She is celebrating her birthday today. Happy birthday, and wish for you to join us here in the program.
Oh yes, happy birthday to you, and we'll see you soon here in the program, reporting and maybe anchoring sometime in the future. Thank you very much, Crystal, for joining me today, and thank you to our audience, our viewers today. We'll see you back next week. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
Mapupuno ng saya, impormasyon at inspirasyon ang hapon mo sa Afternoon Power. Handog sa inyo ng Net25. Sasabay sa inyong tanghalian ang inyong Happy Time Barkada at 12 noon. Alamin ang mga pangyayari sa Asean nations, Asean in Focus at 2 p.m. Ang inyong paboritong awit komentaryo kasama si Leo Obligar sa Piskante ng Bayan. At mga balita sa iba't ibang panig ng bansa, hatid sa atin sa Aguila Probinsya. Siksik ang hapon mo mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, ang inyong Afternoon Power sa Net25.
Ang layunin ng Unlad Kaagapay sa Hanap Buhay, itong programang ito, sa pangunguna ng ating tagapamahalang pangkalahatan ng kapatid Waldo Manalo, ay masasabi nating 4 na layunin. Una ay akitin natin tao sa paghahanap buhay. Ang ikalawang layunin na ituro sa tao kung ano ang iba't ibang hanap buhay na maaari niyang gawin sa bahay lang. At ikatlo ay turuan natin ng tao